I love your book, and it's such a unique approach to teaching film technique and history at the same time. And I guess to start out with, I was curious: is this the approach that you've used over the years when you've taught film?
I have, yes. I teach in an art school, Mass College of Art, and my students are sculptors and painters and designers and photographers and so on. And they're very bright. They're not necessarily bookish. And I've discovered over the years that you can talk all you want, but until you finally do something, that's when you really get it. That's when you really understand it. John Dewey, the old American educator, said you learn by doing. And this book grows out of my real experience with the real students in the college classroom where I teach. I started doing this a few years ago on my own personal webpage. And I began to see that, my students got it. You could blab all you want about on-screen sound or off-screen sound. And there's a lot of talk until I said to them, okay, let's try it with a piece of film. And here's some sound clips. And, how does it behave differently? And there's a certain, it's a deeper level of understanding and a deeper level of engagement. And frankly, a deeper level of excitement when you do it this way. So, yes, I've tried it, and I can tell you it works.
Well, it really is the perfect mix of, just like you said, you learn by doing, and I think that goes for pretty much everything in life. But also that you have your sense of history and theory wrapped up in that, but at the same time you're not buried in a book learning theory. I mean, you're actually doing it. So your book is structured around a lot of innovations that have occurred throughout the history of film, and then
right.
it gives the reader an opportunity to.
Sure,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I identify about 25 moments in film history when something fundamentally changed because some imaginative, inventive, and courageous person said to himself or herself, geez, I don't know what the heck to do here. Let's try this. And from those experiments, film history evolved. And so this is a kind of experience for people to, in their own way, emulate what happened in the past. You end up having to kind of think about movies like D.W. Griffith did for the first time, or Walter Murch did, mixing sound or whatever, from the working end of a Scissors or a Moviola or a Final Cut Pro software, whatever it is. But the fundamental thing is to think their thoughts, make their actions, and then see why movies developed the way they did.
Let me ask you about today, because in the book you do focus on the early innovators like Griffith and Méliès, and when you look at films today, I mean, this is still a very young art form. Do you still see possibilities for innovation in storytelling?
I feel there's so much possibility now, and there's so much opportunity that however yellow the history was, we're now in the golden era. And the reason why I say that is because the direction movies are moving in now is two directions, not only off the screen from the industrial film, which is wonderful, but also up to the screen from the desktop and from the iPhone and so on. I feel that this is a kind of turning point, like Gutenberg invented the printing press and unleashed the modern era. I sort of feel now that with this capacity for more or less everybody to express himself or herself in moving images, something terrific is going to happen. So I have absolutely unbridled enthusiasm for what may be. It may be the end of Hollywood as we know it, and it may certainly change the nature of corporate releases. But in the long run of things, personally, I feel it's a small price to pay, and that Lord knows where we're going to be 50 years from now. But I do think we're moving in a terrifically promising direction.
So you think the kind of the democratization of filmmaking nowadays leaves it open to discovering a lot of exciting new things.
Yes, because, I see in my students, I feel it in myself, and when I talk to other people, you want to create something, you want to leave some mark in the world, you want to do something which is yours and yet shareable, and this, capacity that we have now to do this is terrifically exciting for so many people. In the book there at the end, I end with a sentence that I discovered because I happened to be sleepless one night and reading, of all things, Pliny the Younger's letters to a friend, a Roman writer from the year 100 A.D. And Pliny says to his friend there, his friend says, "How should I live?" And Pliny says, "Create something and shape it so that it becomes yours forever, whereas all else will pass to a succession of owners. This will never cease to be yours from the moment it begins to exist." And, he's telling that to his friend 2,000 years ago, but it seems to me even more true now, and we have a capacity to act on that in ways that would have been unfathomable to Pliny and pretty much incomprehensible to people 50 years ago, too.
Yeah. I think about, I remember Kubrick, because we're a little obsessed with Kubrick on the show. But in an interview I read with him decades ago, he said that the one thing that he always wanted to crack was a way to manipulate the 3-act structure, to turn that on its head, and he could never quite find a way to do that to his satisfaction. Do you think that's ever been done successfully?
Well, I don't know, but about Kubrick, I'll just relate to another story, which is that Kubrick also said that his reason for shooting films was to get to the editing room. That is to say, he is somebody who recognizes that the creation of juxtaposition of shots and scenes and all this kind of stuff is fantastically exciting and really, for him, the heart of the matter, as it is for me. Whether or not people have turned the 3-act, method on its head successfully, yeah, I guess there have been experiments like that. Run, Lola, Run, strikes me as that kind of thing. There are lots of movies which play around. Godard famously said movies should have beginning and end, but not necessarily in that order. So I think, there are people who have done it. I think that the introduction of this new technology will have even more profound effects, not necessarily changing the sort of sequence of storytelling, but enriching the vocabulary and inviting more voices in, and therefore making it a richer and more exciting medium for everybody.
I look at a movie like, obviously Citizen Kane, and I look at the tremendous sense of visual storytelling in that film, and I think, oh my gosh, that's as sophisticated, if not more sophisticated, than a lot of the movies that we have today, or even 9 years before that with Fritz Lang's film. Yeah. And speaking of the early innovators, I mean, even earlier than that, people like Griffith. What did he give us? Because it's often said that Griffith kind of invented the language of cinema.
He gave us so many things. He was a kind of great river into which so many little rivulets flowed. Most of all, it seemed to me, he gave us the confidence that we could tell stories that occur in different places simultaneously, richly, and complexly, so that we could intercut from here to there, and in that way make montage and make the cutting of the film the very heart of the project. So that really moved movies along. It wasn't that they weren't doing stuff like that in literature. God knows Ulysses is as complex, maybe more complex, and then Joyce's Finnegan's Wake went crazy along that lines. But Griffith was somebody who I think brought that to film and made it possible for many people after him. The Russians all looked to Griffith as their great teacher. He was somebody who really made the story open up and move everywhere.
Do you feel that because you cover stuff like sound and color in this book as well, and today we're at a place where people are bemoaning the demise of actual film, and they approach it like it's kind of an apocalyptic doom that's over the film industry. But I don't think it's that severe. I mean, I just think it's another direction that we need to embrace, just like we embrace those innovations like sound and color that we were initially opposed to, perhaps.
I so agree with you. I mean, all of us talk about the death of movies because of the death of the end of a film. I feel is it caught up in the moment, and in the longer run of things, it's not going to be a deal-killing problem. This was exactly the sort of thing people were saying in 1927 and 1928 when sound came in, and they said that's the end of our beautiful art. There was a period of time when filmmaking did kind of stultify a little bit, but ultimately sound has so enriched movies, and I personally feel that the digital revolution makes movie making A, so much easier than it should have had been before, and B, introduces so many more possibilities. I sort of got into this whole business, the practical side of it, from the working end of a moviola, and we would stand there, and cut film. And when I say cut film, I mean cut film with a guillotine splicer and tape and sound and the other track and so on. And the sheer labor of making a change in a cut could take you 20 minutes, 25 minutes. The sort of thing that you can do, with digital editing now in 10 seconds would consume all that much time and effort, and that doesn't really liberate your imagination. I'm really excited about the possibilities of digital editing because I do think that if you have the imagination, which of course is the starting point and no one can give it to you, but if you've got it, my God, the tools available now are fantastic. So I'm not worried about the death of film. I think quite the opposite. It'll change, but we certainly haven't reached the end of anything.
Right. As long as there's storytelling, and there's been storytelling since the beginning of time.
Yes,
it's something we crave. Yeah.
Yeah, Nabokov once said that the world began when somebody was sitting around the fire saying, "Let me tell you about this." And so we have continued. The way we tell it differs, but finally, story is paramount and voice is paramount, and finally, soul is paramount. And the tools are what they are, and to change, and you use them well or badly. But finally, they are in the service of this stuff and not otherwise.
There's also as you say, this book is filled with the different kinds of tools and techniques that filmmakers have at their disposal that they need to kind of perfect. But there's also in the process of doing that, and I think this is where it's very valuable, where you have your reader or your students actually go and practice these techniques. There's also finding your own voice. That means if they're practicing the exercise on camera movement from your book,
right.
Finding your own voice is, I would imagine, finding the motivation for that camera movement so it makes sense to the story.
That's right, and it's not something you can sort of, ratiocinate about beforehand, think yourself into a stupor about. What you end up discovering, everybody who's ever done it with one of my exercises has told me this, what you end up discovering is, well, geez, if I sort of quicken the pace a little bit, or if I shorten it, move them here or there, suddenly the story begins to change, and you think organically about the stuff, and therefore it's not some kind of textbook exercise business. You get it, and you get it in a real way, and that makes a profound difference. And finally, it's a kind of liberating because you begin to realize that filmmakers are probably working it just as tentatively as you are, and they don't know what their voice is until they see it and they say, aha, my God, so that's what I meant. Here I found it.
Mm. And a lot of times they don't realize it until it's in retrospect.
That's right.
They can look at their, like an accomplished director, they can look at their body of work and they can think, okay, that's what I was trying to find. I mean, someone like Woody Allen, he's covering the same bases every movie he does. These themes that he's continuously grappling with.
Right.
I find that fascinating when a director's obsessed with a particular dynamic or theme, and he's just going at it from different angles. I think that's great.
That's right. I mean, it grows out of a feeling state. You know, when you make a movie or you write a book or you write a poem, if you're coming from the mind and if you're thinking about it terribly much, basically it will be dead on the page or dead on the screen or dead wherever, because finally it comes from a heart and feeling and emotion, and Woody is dealing with, the same feelings that he's had for all these years. He absolutely is somebody who utterly enthralls me, too. When I think about movies which have really meant something for me, or scenes that have really meant something for me and really influenced this book when I think about it, in The Purple Rose of Cairo, when Jeff Daniels walks off the screen, like when Buster Keaton walks onto it and Sherlock Jr., and suddenly who's inside and who's outside, and what their relationship is becomes all mixed up, like it is in most of us most of the time. To me, those are magical moments, and Woody is sort of obsessed with those kinds of things, and that theme appears in his films all the time, but not because he sits down and writes any dissertation about it. It's because it's still a living, feeling issue for him. Yeah,
it's part of his DNA. Yeah,
that's right.
There's an element in your book that I'm really interested in, where you discuss voiceover, because speaking of, using these techniques and having them be motivated by the story, voiceover seems to be so tricky because, as you state, it's supposed to kind of express an inner monologue in a way, and yet you run the danger of kind of expressing the subtext in the movie when you do that, don't you?
The voiceover is utterly enthralling sort of thing for me in film, because in so many ways it seems to me the heart of the film experience. It's like, as I say in the book there, it's like a Mobius strip, it comes out and comes in and turns and twists, and so you never can quite exactly figure out where you are, inside or outside of this film, and the narrator who's doing the voiceover is both of those things. That, for me, is so, at the heart of what movies are all about. It's like another way of thinking about the sort of indeterminacy of movies. By that, we mean that the thing stops and goes, and you see a little burst of light, at least in old-time films, and then a moment of darkness and a burst of light, and so you watch a 2-hour movie, and God knows how much time you're sitting there in total darkness, making it up by yourself. So there's always 2 projectors in the room. There's the one in metal, which is in the back of the room, and there's that one up above your pineal gland that's also projecting. Voiceover brings you to that same kind of territory, the inside-outside place, where movies really so excitingly take place.
So a movie like Taxi Driver, I think uses narration perfectly. Or a lot of Scorsese movies, he relies on narration quite a bit, like in Goodfellas or Casino. And in Casino, I think he has almost every single character doing a narration. It's just chock full of narration, that film.
Right.
Does it run the risk, though, especially in the CGI age? You can use the technique to support a movie, but you also run the risk of having your movie be overtaken by that technique.
You certainly can, and that was a big sort of problem in the early 50s. In the early 1950s, they went voiceover crazy, and in so many cases, it was like, the covering of a birthday cake, covering up a cracked cake. When they had a film which was really broken, they said, well, let's just slap some voiceover on it and give it some continuity and coherence, which it doesn't have. So yeah, you can fake it, and you can in fact try to save a sad film with a voiceover. But on the other hand, when used well, it's terrifically exciting. Exciting experiences. Robert Mitchum in the 40s doing voiceover simply resonates and brings you to experience that movie as only he can, and that's because of his voice.
Yeah, that very authoritative, hard-boiled sound. Yeah, and the great film noirs and then on the flip side,
and Out of the Past,
right?
He's talking about seeing her for the first time, and it's just so magical, and that's a good voiceover. Voiceover can do. It's just like every other technique in movies or anything else. You can use it for real, or you can use it to fake, and ultimately, people know the difference.
Yeah. When did your love of films begin? What ignited it?
I was thinking about that the other day, and I realized it is really primitive. I mean, I'm talking about really primitive. And I began to ask myself, well, what was the first movie I ever liked? And I realized it even happened before I saw a real movie. I can go as far back as lying in my crib and looking at the blank wall on my bedroom. This is in Brooklyn many years ago. And the sort of branches were moving in this white light from the street lights. And I was looking at this and, in essence, feeling hypnotized, and I think falling asleep or being awake or in this kind of netherworld state, which utterly enthralled me. Then when I finally saw a movie years later, I'm talking years later, like when I was 6 years old, I said, oh my God, that's just like The Wall. So it's been all these years. It's a very, I think, primitive thing. Movies, for me, continue to feel magical. And I've always felt magical and have always sort of brought me to that place where I'm not quite sure, whether I'm in it or out of it. And for me, that's that kind of magical and usually wonderful experience. So it's way back. And in the early movies, I remember going to, my mother would send me and my brother to the movie theater. We lived in New Jersey at the time. And she sent us to the matinee at 2 o'clock, and we'd pay our money and go into the movie, and there'd be a pirate film on or a cowboy film, and I'd be so enthralled and walk out with this enormous headache and try and reorient myself to the world. So it has been way back and really kind of always.
Yeah. I hear from people occasionally, younger people, that if we discuss a film from the 70s or earlier than that, a lot of them have, not a lot of them because we have a lot of loyal listeners, but quite a few of them have this attitude that those movies don't matter because they happened before they were born.
Right.
What is your defense to that argument, to those young people of the importance of knowing their film history?
Well, I guess because what is true is always true, and what is sort of beautiful is always beautiful, and it's just like John Keats said, and that as soon as they allow themselves to get into it, the black and white barrier is for many of them a big problem. Many of them say, oh my God, I have never seen a black and white movie, and I don't want to. Or, God forbid, even a silent one. Sort of the barrier is impenetrable. And then you put up on the screen, city lights or something, and they get to the end, and they say, oh, my God. And it's so that's the defense. The defense is that Greek urns are still beautiful, and, paintings by Watteau are still beautiful, and so are Picasso's still beautiful, and things of the moment are wonderful, but they do pass, and that which endures continues to speak to people because it deals with real emotions and things with which people have eternally been concerned. We're not that different from our forebears 20,000 years ago. It's the same heart, the same feelings, and good movies, whether they're in black and white or silent or 3D, all fundamentally, fulfill that purpose.
You mentioned color in black and white. What in your mind does the black and white form give us that color cannot, and vice versa?
I feel black and white for me gives movies a certain kind of abstractness and a certain enclosure that for me is very attractive. It also for me, I guess, is an element of nostalgia. Looking at these old films and watching New York in the 1940s, in black and white, for me is a kind of thrilling time travel kind of thing. But, black and white enables you to both watch the movie and know you're watching a movie in ways that color, for all its benefit, doesn't necessarily do. Color is so much harder, I think, to control artistically. The light's different, and from shot to shot, and matching it is harder. And often the colors end up prompting feelings which don't really have that much to do with what the movie is all about. The black and white is more concentrated. It's like, it's like a liqueur made out of a wine. It's distilled. It's finer. I love old black and white movies. I realize that's sort of a crazy sounding thing to say, and Lord knows there are wonderful color films as well. Martin Scorsese's Hugo, for example, a great color movie, of course, about a black and white time. But they put you in a different place on your seat, and you feel differently about your relationship to the film because of the black and the white and the color.
Yeah, and I think they really allow kind of a faster journey into that dream state that we all look for when we watch a movie. Yeah.
I have often thought, there's some movies that always speak to me. Fellini's La Strada, for example, which is a black and white film, and God forbid that were ever colorized, because the kind of beauty of that movie. In that black and white photography and that picture of that man's loss and loneliness at the end and hunger for something spiritual and transcendent, I don't think you could do that in color, or at least you couldn't do that movie in color. Lord knows it would be a desecration. So it's not only it's a frame, it's also a canvas, and it's a way of feeling, about the world, which is a little bit cooler and a little bit more remote than color movies often are.